News at 5, 6, and 10.
Welcome to This Week in Kansas with your host, Tim Brown.
Hello and welcome to This Week in Kansas. Thank you for being with us this morning. Governor Brownback has a plan to help close the budget gap. His plan includes slowing some of his initial tax cuts and increasing other taxes, notably sin taxes, by a substantial margin. But the governor insists that the march to zero income tax in Kansas continues. Senate Bill 45 would allow anyone who legally owns a firearm in the state of Kansas to carry that gun concealed. No gun safety classes would have to be completed and no permit would be required. 6 other states have similar laws on the books. We will start with the budget and taxes, and lots to get to this morning. So let's just go ahead and start with the governor's latest proposal. And we were talking a little bit before the show. My math, and that's a little shaky and rusty at times, I'll be the first to admit, but PJ, I think you mentioned, and it certainly seems this way to me, I don't think we make up the entire gap.
It didn't even look like we made up half of it to me. When I ran the numbers, it's like a couple $300 million, but we need 748 or something like that. So I think we're still quite a bit short, and we are really, the proposed tax increases. I think there was a quote from Kathleen Sebelius, I think it was, in the Eagle saying, I don't believe we have enough drinkers and smokers in all of Kansas to create enough tax revenue from the added liquor and cigarette tax to come close to grabbing into the budget shortfall. Yeah. And we're talking about robbing the highway fund again. We can't rob capers again, I don't think. I think that money has to get put back in. Constitutionally, we can only take it out once. Wasn't that the deal?
I'm not sure about that, Bob. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I don't know about that either. But
and I don't know that it's taking money from capers, but it's delaying paying into capers, I believe, right. Which is kind of, I know that's semantics and kind of one of 6 of one, half dozen the other, I suppose.
Well, there was a state representative on a panel at a conference that I was at today who insists that that we can delay those payments to capers and restructure capers because we are really, the fund is really not in trouble for anybody who is a current or a soon-to-be retiree, that it is solid and substantial to 2030, and as long as we can look down the road and figure out how to fix that by 2030, perhaps by restructuring what kind of benefits incoming employees, new employees get, and people who are a long ways from retirement, that we're okay with capers.
That's only 15 years.
Well, that's exactly what I was thinking. That time will go by pretty doggone fast, and the hole that we're talking about is what, $36 million or something? I mean, it's a lot of money.
Yeah, it's a huge amount of money, and we're kind of getting back to that whole situation where we're seeing in the past with the legislature kicking the can down the road. I'm afraid with capers. I hope that doesn't happen, but it sure seems like it. Bob, you know, when we talk about the governor's plan and we talk about the budget, it's interesting because just a few short years ago, the governor's pledge was to cut taxes. Now we're looking at raising taxes, just different kinds of taxes, though, but we're still looking at raising taxes.
Tim, I remember a month or two ago when I was a guest on this panel, I think PJ was there too, you asked me, Bob, can Republicans stand firm? And I think you meant against raising taxes, yep. And I said no. And you looked at me kind of funny, and I had to repeat, no.
No, so I do remember that, and you did say that.
We start to see the peeling away, and as I think we mentioned, I mean, we're not yet, the arithmetic doesn't match up yet. So we see the governor doing a couple things. First of all, repealing, or how do we say, layering back the scheduled reduction in the personal income tax, so still reduced but at a slower rate. We see these sin taxes. Now, could we call these taxes on vices, not sin? I mean, I don't view smoking and drinking as moral matters. I know that some people do, but it's not really sinful. Well, it's a vice, perhaps.
I think it depends on which side of the fence you're on, Bob, and I think with Governor Brownback, these are easier things for him to tax because of what they are.
Well, I think everybody... governors and legislators of all stripes find it easy to tax those, and it's unfortunate because
it's a regressive
especially,
tax.
well, especially for smoking. I think smoking is concentrated amongst lower income people more than higher income people today. So we're starting a substantial tax increase, and I think last week on this show you mentioned some of the things that may happen, such as black market smuggling of cigarettes. Maybe some people will stop smoking because of that. That would probably be a good thing, but that's not my choice to make for them. That's their own choice to make. There's also you know, that we have started to repeal some itemized deductions. It's proposed that that be slowed down a little bit, so that's a little bit of a tax increase. There were some other things, small things. There's a tax amnesty program thought to raise $30 million for the state general fund. The consumption taxes we talked about. On school funding, you know, the block grant program that I think you talked about last week, the Kansas Association of School Boards, they estimate that would cut school funding by $127 million over, and they didn't really say if that was 1 year or the next 2 years, but so there's a little bit of money there. But you know, there still, I think, has to be more money found either from the revenue side or the spending side in order to make the whole thing work.
You know, one of the criticisms that I've heard of the governor's plan so far, people say this looks very, very familiar to them when you get back to the campaign, and it looks very similar to Paul Davis's plan. Now, the governor's people say, no, it's vastly different. But I guess, again, it depends on who you ask.
Yeah, I believe Paul Davis said no more future income tax reductions. The governor slowed that down. And, you know, just my guess is that he would even have to stop the reductions altogether. And I just don't know. There's going to have to be money made up some ways. You know, we've talked in the past about the Kansas Policy Institute and some ideas they have, but they were mostly aimed at some structural things, one-time stopgap measures, such as some of the unspent funds that school districts have, the funds that keeps going up and up, more than what they really need to manage their cash flow. Use some of that, but the problem is, and this is the Kansas Policy Institute's plan makes this very clear, this is just a stopgap measure until we introduce some more long-term reforms. And we've talked about it in the past, like these streamlining commissions, public-private partnerships, outsourcing. Those things have been looked at in the past. They've been turned down by the legislature. We need those now, and those are things that can't just pop up like in a year. These are more long-term projects, but I don't see the governor going forward with those types of initiatives.
Let's take a commercial break. When we come back, we will continue our discussion on the budget and taxes and what the governor and the legislature can do this session. We'll be back.
What were you expecting? A little garnish? Introducing Longhorn's bold flavors, bold price for $12.99. The Fire Grill Triple Bacon Sirloin, the Shiitake Truffle Mushroom Sirloin, or the Garlic Provolone Sirloin. All with salad and honey wheat bread for just $12.99. Longhorn Steakhouse. You can't fake steak. Now try our slow roasted shaved prime rib sandwich or the rest of our steakhouse lunch combo starting at $7.99.
My tax returns are here.
All right, I'll take those. Just sign here, here, and here. And good luck with that car.
Folks, don't let some clown take your money. At the largest Chevrolet Ford dealer in Kansas, we want you to get the car that you want to drive, and you can hold on to your refund.
No matter what your credit is, we've got the inventory and finance options to get you a newer or even a brand new vehicle, and you keep your hard-earned money.
I believe these belong to you, miss.
Your money goes further with us. Lubers, the friendly way to buy.
Get your family back to New Way this month and experience our all-new fresh hand-cut fries. This month, combo our delicious bacon cheddar New Way, hand-cut fries and root beer for $5.99.
Nobody, and I mean nobody, sells Tempur-Pedic mattresses for less than the furniture store in Kansas and McPherson. The best-selling bed in America just got better with the addition of the Tempur-Pedic Air and Super Cool Breeze bed. Nobody has a bigger selection. We don't just stock catalogs. You can comfort test any Tempur-Pedic here, and free financing, free delivery, free setup, and free removal of your old mattress set.
We're the furniture store of Kansas in McPherson.
And thank you.
And welcome back. We've been talking about budget and taxes and what the legislature might do this session to try to make up that gap that we see with that they face. It's about $600 to $700 million, depending on when you measure it and what you look at. And the challenge with this is that the governor has a plan. The legislature would have to agree to this plan. We've already heard from some lawmakers, including some on the Republican side, that said they wouldn't really go along with all portions of this plan. And it's interesting because we heard about the governor's economic experiment to decrease these taxes quickly, the path to zero, and he says he's going to continue that, but we're going to slow that march, and we're increasing taxes in some areas. And I think the question would be at this point, is the governor's plan successful or is it a failure?
Well, and I don't think, there are people that are saying we haven't given it sufficient time to know that it takes time for this, for the tax cut spur of revenue to kick in and take place and get going. I believe that Arthur Laffer did an interview with, might have been a Kansas City Star columnist, and just stood by his prediction saying that, Kansas has to be ready to give this 10 to 15 years to kick in.
Well, we don't have 10 to 15 years.
We don't have 10 to 15 years. We can't balance our budget. Some of the legislators were talking about, well, we're streamlining Medicaid, and we're doing well with reducing the cost of Medicaid. And if we can just get this compact in place and we can reduce our Medicare cost as well by privatizing Medicare, that maybe this is going to be some of the answer to the budget shortfall. However, we're reducing the state's burden for Medicaid, but the private companies that are administering that program are reporting losses in the double-digit millions every single quarter. So that can't go on forever. And we're not going to continue the savings from Medicare or Medicaid. That cost is going to go back up because those companies are not going to stay here and administer if they keep losing money.
Bob, I think a lot of folks said this would take some time if it would even work. We talked about that on this show years ago, that didn't know how quickly this could kick into gear if it ever did at all. And I think the trick to it would be if you're really going to pull this off successfully, you have to have a lot of money in the bank to bridge that gap. And now we're kind of struggling a bit.
Perhaps so. We need to, I think we said it's easier to cut taxes than it is to cut spending, and the challenge we now have is to align spending with the new flow of lower tax revenue. Now, I mean, the other solution proposed by many, of course, is to raise tax revenue back up to match our spending. I mean, there's two choices that we could make. But Kansas has been an underperforming state for decades, and so I'd at least like to give the Brownback tax plan as long as we've given President Obama, let's say, which has been quite a while since his summer of recovery some years ago. Speaking of the president, I really felt good watching the State of the Union address the other night, because he told us, and I think this will cure our school finance program, he said that high school is free.
Well, there you go.
So if that's really true, then I think we've got things solved. But on a serious note, my biggest issue with the governor this year, and something that we could really work on, but again, it's something that's going to take several years and would save the state a tremendous amount of money, is expanding school choice programs, either charter schools or vouchers or tax credit scholarships for private schools. The governor has made no mention of that. He's really not been an advocate for school choice. The arithmetic basically works like this. Most charter school programs or vouchers or things like that, they usually get somewhere around the base state aid, which is about $3,900 in Kansas. But Kansas spends about $8,000 per year, $7,088 per year on each student. So that difference there is money that the state would not have to spend to educate these children.
But Bob, I think the challenge with that is then what happens to the kids who are special needs kids, the ones that really where the bulk of that money goes? What happens to them?
Well, a lot of states, such as Oklahoma, the tax credit scholarships were targeted at the special needs children first. And school choice critics throughout the country say no, private schools, charter schools, they won't take these special needs kids, but they do. But aside from that, that's a fairly small proportion of the children. We're talking about the bread and butter that we could save this money on, plus provide choice, which I think is a good thing. The problem is, in school choice critics are right. They say there's not enough schools to accept all these children. And that's right. When the government has a monopoly on something, that really suppresses its competition. It'll take several years to generate enough charter schools and other things. But the governor just did not do this when he should have.
Well, the issue with the charter schools that I've seen and the voucher suggestion is that it's always about saving money from what the state is spending now. And I always go back to the question of, if you really could, if the tuition at a private school was, say, actually $3,900 a year, and you could break even with your voucher, so you would actually have the choice to send your child there. The problem is the tuition is not $3,900 a year. Collegiate is close to $12,000. You can't go to that private school for as much, I mean, it costs you more than going to WSU. You can't afford that for your kindergartner, even with a $3,900 voucher.
Well, I think Wichita Collegiate School is an exception, that it's a quite high-priced school. But I also was doing some research the other day, and a huge number of Wichita Collegiate School students are on scholarships that pay for, I don't know how much, but at least some of their education. There are many, private schools that run in the $6,000 to $7,000 range per student.
Bob, you mentioned a minute ago that we need to give Governor Brownback's plan time. The challenge that I have with that scenario, and I think this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Constitutionally, we have to balance the budget every year. So how can we give it time? We just don't have the money.
And that is a big problem, and that's why I think we've mentioned for a couple of years that we needed to start working on spending at the same time that he started working on the tax cuts. And I don't think that happened, and now we're in kind of the pickle that we're in. Well,
we should have done the spending first and built up the tax surplus to have the money to pay for the time frame we waited.
But see, this gets back to the problem that we've seen many times with the state in the past, and politically it's much easier, because when times are good and the money's rolling in and we actually have a few extra bucks, then we immediately want to cut taxes. And Bob, I'm going to be with you on this one. We cut taxes, but we don't cut spending. We just cut the taxes because that's what the taxpayer wants. And the politician can say, hey, I cut your taxes, but you still have your services. Then when times get a little rougher, then we're in trouble. And see, this is politically, I think it's the easy thing to do, and I think, unfortunately, our politicians oftentimes take the easy way out, and we're seeing the result of that.
Well, I think like during the Sebelius years, I'm trying to picture the chart in my head. I mean, when we had some years of rapidly rising tax revenue, we spent all that. I mean, spending rose very rapidly as well, and then people become accustomed to that level of spending. There are constituencies that depend on that spending, and then, as you mentioned, it's very difficult to rein that back in
well, didn't
as
a lot
the time
of that
goes
money
on.
go into the highway fund that we've been raiding for the last 3 years?
I don't recall.
That money, that slush fund for the highway fund, the $9 billion or whatever it was that was set aside, that's where most of that.
That's our savings account, is the highway fund.
Yeah, that's where there was an awful lot of money put into that, saying, well, now that we have this good wave of tax revenues, we'll have this money and we'll guarantee that we'll have our infrastructure taken care of for years to come. We've got this 10 or 15-year highway plan that's now turning into a 1 or 2 year highway plan as we pull more and more money out of it to shore up the mess we've made.
I don't recall the details, but it seems that I remember Governor Parkinson that there was a lot of borrowing in that plan also too.
There was, yes.
Well, and the Capers situation, I think, also illustrates this, and we've seen this for years and years and years now. When it's again, politicians kind of kick the can down the road, and we actually had some real positive, I think, efforts and things happening with what was it, last session or the session before, with the governor and the legislature making some changes to Capers that actually stemmed some of the bleeding and turned it around a bit. Of course, we had some success also with the markets, but it would be a shame, I think, to go back on that.
Well, now we have a proposal to borrow, I think, $1.5 billion, if I recall.
In bonds?
Yes, and then invest that money with the hope that we can earn more in return on that than we pay in interest on that, and use that extra income to help bolster up the Capers funds. And I think that's a dangerous idea, because
it's kind of a scary proposition.
Yes, I mean, we might have to pay, I don't know, 4%, 3% on those bonds or something like that. And yes, some years we're going to exceed that. Certainly this year, I mean, hopefully we will, but there will be many years when we will not make that.
All right, let's take another commercial break. When we come back, we'll talk about constitutional carry something looks like it may very well happen here in the state of Kansas. We'll be back.
Don't miss the big sale at Furniture Row. You'll find incredible deals store-wide on dining sets, sectionals, and more. We're making room, and when we make room, you save big. The big sale, on now at Furniture Row.
Police have been taking a lot of flack for shooting unarmed citizens. But what would you do if you were in their shoes?
Get on the ground! Start!
Thursday night, we've had Deb Ferris and an outspoken community activist in life or death situations, and they found out just how fast things can escalate.
You shot an unarmed man?
Yeah, he was unarmed.
Don't miss Shoot, Don't Shoot. Thursday on Cake News at 10.
I'm Teresa Vale. You're invited to the first annual Wichita Sports Show. The new Wichita Sports Show. New Travel and Adventure Expo. New Get Cooking with Michael Pierce. New Play in Our Lazy River.
C's for free fishing tickets.
Save on your next adventure. Education, family fun, a great time. Of course, heroes get a deal. Thursday the 29th through Sunday, February 1st at the Pavilions in Park City.
Tapping them, activating the speaker, and blocking
I don't know. I think everything's better if you use it on the server side.
I got it. Hey, I wonder who this is, guys. Look, it's my new Wi-Fi modem from Cox. I forgot this was coming today. Wow. Guess I have the fastest internet now.
Whoa.
Let's go install it!
Yeah!
Trust the nerds. Get access to the fastest in-home Wi-Fi from Cox with high-speed internet as low as $19.99 a month, and ask how to get a $200 prepaid card.
Now's the time to get a super night's sleep at a great price from Denver Mattress. Choose between two of our best mattresses. Get a Richmond or Telluride queen set for just $9.99. Better tomorrows start tonight at Denver Mattress, your adjustable bed headquarters.
And welcome back. You know, we've heard a lot about concealed carry than open carry here in the state of Kansas recently, and now they're talking about constitutional carry, which is a little bit different animal, and it's interesting because this would allow people to carry concealed if they legally have a firearm, but you wouldn't have to have that permit to carry concealed. And Kansas isn't the only state that does this. There's a few others. I think there's 5 or 6. Maybe we'd be either 6 or 7. I can't remember. But not too many states have done this yet. And it looks like it's going to. I think it's got a good shot at passing. I could be wrong, but I think it's got a good shot.
There are plenty of people ready to vote for any and all and every gun right in that they can imagine, and just to keep pushing this. Now, I don't know where this ends. Like after constitutional carry, what do we do next? Do we start putting a handgun in every backpack for every school child on the way? You know, just in case the bad guy that looks like
heard that proposal, but you
look,
never
the
know.
bad guy that looks like he's spraying weeds might actually be a bad guy that needs to be shot by a second grader. But no, that's facetious. But it does seem like we're getting pretty unlimited. When one of the things that made me comfortable about concealed carry was the requirement for safety classes, and the fact that somebody who has got a gun in their pocket will actually have had to go through some kind of a process to ensure that they're going to handle it safely and that they know what they're doing with it. Frankly, I feel happier about open carry of untrained people than I do concealed carry, because then at least I know who's got a gun.
Yeah.
But
and you know, and it's interesting. I have seen some open carry examples recently. I was in Walmart just the other day, and I saw a guy with a gun on his hip. And you know, the open carry is kind of an interesting one too, because I guess it's up to the individual stores or wherever to. I think they can limit that, if I'm not mistaken. Bob, would that be correct?
I'm not sure about the open carry. You know, for concealed carry, it's common, you know, for you to see the sign on the door of a merchant saying no concealed carry in this establishment.
Yeah, you know, it's an interesting thing. You know, when I was a kid, I took hunter safety courses, and you know, we lived in a rural community, and owning a firearm wasn't uncommon at all, and we did. But you know, the hunter safety courses I thought were very valuable, and they taught you to really respect that firearm, and you would hope that people that would own them, particularly people that wanted to carry them around in public, would have some type of training. But
you know, another thing that kind of bothers me about the whole movement is we haven't matched up law enforcement response to a man with a gun to the right of people to be carrying guns everywhere. I mean, we've had people in Walmart shot down by the police for having a BB gun off the rack or whatever. So the perceived threat of someone with a gun, I think this is a real issue for law enforcement. It makes it much harder to tell. In a real situation, it makes it much harder to tell who the bad guy with the gun is and who the good guy with the gun is. And I think it puts, I wouldn't do it because I would feel like it put me at risk.
Bob, what are your thoughts on constitutional carry?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the other states that have this, and many of these are states you would think of as conservative: Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Wyoming. Yeah. But there's kind of a stinker in the list, which is Vermont, which is, you know, the home of, what's his name, the guy who yelled. But no, Vermont is really a liberal state. But here's my point, Tim. If it's true that the Constitution says you have the right to carry arms, then why do we need permission from the government to do that? Are we, you know, that it's as simple as that for me. I think that concealed carry has not been a problem. I mean, I asked Sheriff Henshaw when he was sheriff a few years ago, he spoke at the Pachyderm Club, I think, I says, have you had a problem with concealed carry permit holders committing crimes with their concealed weapons? And he said, no, absolutely not. And I think that's the pattern across the country. This may be kind of an issue that's not that such a big deal, because I would imagine that almost everybody who really wants to carry a weapon concealed in Kansas has already gone through the permitting process. There may be a few people still that, you know, that may take advantage of being able to carry conceal without having to go through the process. It's not inexpensive. The permits to the state, I think the fees are about $125 plus a course. The course you have to take, generally I think about $100 or something like that as well. So it's not, you know, it's not an inexpensive type of thing. I noticed that Senator Aletha Fauskido in the Wichita Eagles said she will oppose the bill. She said it's scary. It's like we are going back to the wild, wild west. Now, I've done some reading about the American West and the settlement of it, and you know, the wild, wild west, I think, is really a creation of movies. The West was really a very peaceful time. There was no government in many cases, but people respected property rights and figured out a way to resolve their disputes and differences without shooting it up like we see in TV so often. So I'll dispute that. But also, you know, I know the representative that Senator Fauskido represents. That is a district where I think a lot of people would feel safer if they were able to carry a gun once in a while.
Well, I think you got to consider that in the wild, wild west and how wild it really was, you got to go down and read the historical markers in Caldwell. I think 12 marshals in 19 months, 11 of them shot to death on the street. Sounds kind of wild.
But see, I guess my thought is, Bob, on your statement about, you know, people would feel safer if they carried. They can carry. They can carry a gun. You can go down and open carry right now. You can carry concealed if you want to. You just have to get the permit and take a class, so you're hopefully safe. You know, the thing that worries me, and I will say this right off the bat, I think most gun owners are very responsible people. I think they take it very seriously. I'm 99% of them. I think there is a small, tiny minority out there that might not. And if you've ever fired a handgun, it's really hard to hit anything. It's not like firing a rifle or a shotgun. Handguns are tough to hit stuff with, particularly in an intended target. If you've got a lot of adrenaline going through you,
if you were in an actual confrontation type of thing,
it's very challenging. It's very challenging just to square up and shoot something without a bunch of adrenaline going through you and hit it with a handgun. So I would hope people would take classes and get the appropriate training and know to respect that firearm and realize, you know, that it's a huge undertaking to own something like that, let alone carry it around.
I understand why people like to have guns and do things like target shooting.
It's fun.
But it is fun. It's a lot of fun.
Target shooting is a lot of fun, yeah.
It's a I don't know. It's kind of like, look at what I did. I hit the can and hit the target.
It's a challenge.
Thing.
It's a
cool.
bit of a rush.
I think people do like to, you know, feel justifiably that they can be responsible for some of their own self-protection. I mean, Ferguson, Missouri is not that far from Wichita, Kansas. I hope, you know, that we don't have anything like that here. But Tim, you mentioned about the vast majority of gun owners being responsible. The rest, you know, are, let's say, the criminal element who already own and use guns in an illegal fashion, and they're really, I think, unlikely to be affected or impacted by this law.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens with this. And and what the outcome is. You know, it's Bob, you do make, I think, an excellent point. I think a lot of people thought when concealed carry was going through that we would see a lot of shootings and
traffic accidents would escalate into shootouts.
Yeah. I think the fact that that most people are a little cautious about pulling a gun to start shooting.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's something that just everybody would grab out their gun and start going for it.
And they should be cautious, I think, and I think that's what the classes teach. I think the concealed carry classes, from my understanding, spend quite a bit of time on what the law says and what you should do if you're in a
and what your liabilities
situation.
might be if you decide to do
it
that.
also gives you a real good lesson in what you can hit that you weren't aiming at. And that is something that anybody who has done any target practicing, especially with a handgun, you know, that you will say, stop to think now, look how many feet you were from what you were aiming at. If that target had actually been the threat, and that was a 4-year-old over here, your bullet didn't hit the target, it hit the unintended target. And that makes people think. They don't want to be responsible for causing a problem like that. So they're more careful. One
story I saw in the media this week, and then we'll go on to our commercial break in the next segment, I thought was kind of interesting. There was a gentleman who was a concealed carry. He had a permit. This was in another state, and he was going into a store, and I don't know if his jacket came open. Somebody saw the gun, though, and followed him in the store, tackled him, thinking that maybe he was going to do something.
Commit a crime.
Commit a crime, and he was well within his rights and legal, and actually the guy that tackled him and roughed him up was arrested. It was an interesting story, and I hadn't really thought of that angle on everything, but I guess, you know, anything can happen, I suppose. Let's take a commercial break. When we come back, we'll talk about medical marijuana and the possibility of that happening here in the state of Kansas. We'll be back.
When you want a dependable truck, you want the most awarded pickup of 2014. You want the truck from the family of the most dependable, longest-lasting full-size pickups on the road. You want the Chevy Silverado, made of high-strength dependability. Now get 0% APR for 60 months, or current GM owners can trade up to get $6,500 total value on this Silverado. Chevrolet, find new roads.
This Sunday, it's BOGO at New Way. Buy one medium New Way, get one free with purchase of a drink like our world-famous root beer. Crumley is even better on Sundays at New Way, a Wichita tradition.
You're gonna love a New Way Cafe. New Way.
Make your tax dollars go farther at Cherry Orchard Furniture.
All mattress sets on sale now, starting at $179 for queen. Our mattress prices won't be beat. Free layaway or free financing up to 36 months. Don't miss this huge tax time savings event at Cherry Orchard Furniture.
When we first worked with Kitchen Tune-Up, it was at another residence. They met our deadline, our timelines, choices that they had, and the selections that they gave us were very much to our liking. Kitchen Tune-Up was awesome.
Don't you worry about a thing. Don't you
You want it, you got it. With the Honda Civic for just $159 a month. Want 39 miles per gallon? Focus and Elantra can't deliver that. But with Honda Civic, you got it. Want a top safety pick? You got it with Civic, not with Corolla. When Civic gives you more standard features than the other brands, and it starts at just $159 a month, why settle for less than a Honda? You want it, you got it. With the Honda Civic at your Kansas Heartland Honda dealer now.
There's good, better, and best, and then there's the excellent quality of our Mennonite-made, handcrafted solid wood furniture here at the Furniture Store of Kansas in McPherson. Liquids leave no stain. Look how easy it opens and leaves that store inside. Don't try this with others. This stuff's built strong. Come see our solid Pennsylvania cherry handcrafted furniture. You're going to want to feel the quality of this solid wood furniture.
And welcome back. We've seen marijuana legalized for medical uses in other states across the country, and even for recreational use in a few states. Will this happen in Kansas, the medical side of it? I don't know the recreational use will happen anytime soon, but the medical side, it looks like it's getting a little bit more traction, gaining traction. We're actually seeing, there was a hearing this week, testimony about it, and I think lawmakers are a little bit more open to it than they were 5 to 10 years ago.
Well, I think that we've seen some evidence in other states where they have had medical marijuana legalized, that there are conditions, there are medical conditions for which there is enormous relief and benefit from marijuana. One of them is the cancer chemotherapy thing for relief of the nausea that accompanies chemotherapy, that it improves the quality of life of a person who is already suffering a great deal. And I've always thought that it was the height of interesting that to relieve the pain of cancer, it's perfectly legal to get a prescription for unlimited amounts of morphine, but you can't smoke a joint.
Yeah, heavy-duty narcotics versus.
Yeah. And that seemed kind of backward to me. Of course, you know, I mean, I'm closer to Bob's opinion on topics like this. I think people should. I think it should be people's own decision what they want to put in their body, and I'm not sure that there's that government regulations against use of substances make any sense from the standpoint of preventing people from using those. I think there's a widespread opinion among a lot of people that if you legalized marijuana, particularly for recreational use, then you would have everybody using unlimited amounts of marijuana. And quite frankly, I think people who don't use marijuana today still wouldn't use marijuana whether it was legal or not.
Well, I think, you know, people make the argument about alcohol and prohibition when they talk about legalizing marijuana for both medicinal and for recreational use, and they point to, you know, the evils of alcohol. You know, alcohol causes plenty of problems. There are lots of people that are addicted to drinking, addicted to alcohol, and how different is this, Bob? I think I know what side you're going to come down on this one.
But I'm not optimistic about this passing. This hearing that was held this week was an informational hearing only, not an actual legislative hearing. This is similar to something I was involved in, and I can't remember if it was 2010 or 2011, where I helped organize a number of medical marijuana users, and we had an informational hearing, this time in the House of Representatives in the Health Committee. Well, I mean, as soon as the testimony started, the chair left. Shortly after that, the vice chair left, and there was dwindling attendance throughout the meeting. People just did not want to be there, and many of those legislators who left are still there today. So I really do not feel, optimistic that there's going to be much traction on this. You know, part of it is I think some legislators just don't want to go up against the federal government. You know, there's that tension there that the federal government still has marijuana Schedule I, I think the highest level of severity as far as punishment goes. So there's a conflict there. You know, there's something else that's going to come to head in a little bit in Wichita, where people who have gathered the petition to reduce the penalty for carrying of marijuana in Wichita to just a civil penalty and expungement after a year, they have filed a successful petition, and now the Wichita City Council has to deal with this one way or another. But I hear, and I've not been able to verify this yet, that there are legislators in the state of up in the city of Topeka that are going to file an injunction preventing this ordinance in Wichita from going forward to reduce the penalties for marijuana. If they're going to do that, I don't think that those people are also going to stand for medical marijuana in Kansas as well. So unfortunately, I just don't believe that we've made much progress in Kansas towards this goal, which I think would be a good thing to have.
Bob, what happened to the less government intrusion and smaller government folks when you talk about things like that? I'm kind of curious.
Well, who are you talking about? I mean, if you're talking about Republicans, the generic Republican is very much, wants to be in control of people. Absolutely. Just on a little bit different dimension than a lot of Democrats do, but by and large, they're in there because, you know, they think they know what's best for us.
Well, there you go. Interesting. Let's go ahead. Yeah, I agree with you 100%, both of you. I don't think this stands any chance of passing this session, but, you know, I do think the door is open. And it's kind of like the gay marriage situation, I think.
Some legislators told me that if you get the Kansas Medical Society behind you, then that is a key to gaining support of some legislators. But I believe the KMS testified today as an opponent to this law.
Interesting. All right. Let's take a commercial break. When we come back, we'll talk about straight ticket voting and what that would mean for the state of Kansas. We'll be back.
Gin Blossoms, live Friday, February 27th at the Orpheum. A benefit to fight cancer, supporting the Dragon Master Foundation. Tickets on sale now at Select-A-Seat.
Cake First Alert invites you to donate to Warm Hearts. The coat you no longer wear can still make you feel warm all over by protecting a neighbor in need.
Donate new or gently used coats, sweaters, or blankets at any in-the-bag cleaners now through January 31st.
A new year means a new you, and the Mattress Hub is ready to change the way you sleep forever. Celebrate and save with Serta. Find instant rebates up to $300. Or buy a bed, get a bed for free. That's right, buy a Serta I-Series or iComfort and get a bed for free. Plus, elevate into luxury and save with the Queen Memory Foam on an adjustable base for just $9.99. Welcome in the new year with huge savings only at the Mattress Hub.
Follow the cheap sheet to the Mattress Hub.
Brr, it's cold out there, and while you and I might take the protection of a warm coat for granted, many of our neighbors struggle with this basic need. The good news is, any old coats you have laying around can still protect someone from cold weather while making you feel warm all over.
Share the warmth. Donate new or gently used coats, sweaters, or blankets at any in-the-bag cleaners now through January 31st. The Salvation Army will distribute them to those in need. Learn more at cake.com.
About to dial 1-800 to buy flooring? Stop! You've got to shop The Floor Project, the first truly unique flooring store in Wichita, featuring wide, bright aisles displaying only the latest, most popular flooring styles. Select any floor, then virtually try it before you buy it, using our Easy View Room Designer to see how it looks in any room setting, even your own room. You'll love what you see. Then take home huge flooring samples at no charge. During The Floor Project's holiday flooring sale, save up to 17% on every in-stock floor. The Floor Project. Selection, service, price.
And welcome back. Secretary of State Chris Kobach would like you to be able to vote straight ticket. Now, a lot of people wonder, what is straight ticket? It's a good question because Kansas hasn't done this for a long time, so probably most of the people live voting today have never had that option. But straight ticket allows you to go in, as I understand it, the voting booth, and you can just pick Republican or Democrat, and all Republicans are voted for on your ballot, or all Democrats, or if you wanted to have a libertarian straight ticket, I would imagine you could do that too. I don't know how that would work with independents, though. I don't know if you could do that, but interesting concept, and it's causing a bit of controversy up at Topeka.
Well, it seems to me like that is just another thing of dumbing down what the electorate has to do in decision making when it comes to voting. If you vote a straight ticket, you voted for everybody that's your party without bothering to know any individual differences between candidates, and especially when you get into some of the more minor races. A lot of people don't do a whole lot of studying now, and I guess the vote often boils down to name recognition, or maybe what their aunt or uncle or cousin said was a good idea for an individual candidate. But straight ticket bothers me because it encourages people not to bother to do any research or reading or to understand one candidate from another. They just go in and say, I'm a Republican, there's my vote, or I'm a Democrat, and there's my vote. And like you said, I don't know quite what you do with independents or libertarians, somebody that doesn't have a candidate in every spot. Can you just vote for the candidates they do have?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question.
That'd be an interesting.
You know, conceivably on a voting machine, which is really a computer, that could be handled. For example, the Kansas Democratic Party ran no one for Senate this year. So if you pulled straight ticket Democratic Party, a machine could conceivably say, well, your party doesn't have anyone for Senate, do you want to choose someone else? But you can't do that on a paper ballot, and so many people vote in advance, which is done by paper. You know, there's also some other issues there, such as our judicial retention races are in the form, shall Justice so-and-so be retained, yes or no? So that's not related to a party. Initiatives, like the recent Wichita sales tax proposal, not a party, it's you say yes or no. Referenda, if we ever had them, would be the same type of thing. Constitutional amendments, shall this amendment be adopted, yes or no? And then undervoting, you know, it's a perfectly rational choice not to cast a vote for a particular office. I don't believe we should have an insurance commissioner, so I did not vote for any of them.
You know, it's interesting because, and we were talking during the break, and PJ, you certainly alluded to this, we already put, I think, the least amount of effort that we can into voting and electing our elected officials, which is really sad when you think about it. And it's amazing to me because after we do elect them, everybody complains and gets all upset. So if you're that upset about it, you should have done something about it on election days. But we already put the minimal amount of effort. We have the these low, teeny tiny turnouts, and you see other countries around the world that become democratic nations, and they're so excited to vote, and everybody goes and votes, and then we look pretty pathetic in comparison. And then I think you do something like this, and boy, you're just taking that much more out of it. I mean, it's, and there are people, and I guess you wouldn't have to vote straight ticket if you didn't want to, but I really like the thought, and I know this is crazy, and probably most people don't do it, but like PJ said, research the individual candidates. You might really like that Republican, but you might like this independent, you might like that libertarian, you might like that Democrat. I know that doesn't happen very often, but it certainly is possible.
Well, I think it would happen more often if more people did actually study the history and the positions and the opinions of the people that they were voting for. We might see a lot more people that would have differing opinions on individual candidates. I don't think that most Republicans in Kansas would agree with every Republican on the ballot if they actually looked at what their positions were. And so you might see more of it, but what we've seen in decades of not having a straight ticket is that we don't get very much variation in those races.
Yeah. I wonder, and I don't know what it takes for this to can this just be voted on by the legislature and happen, or is this a constitutional amendment, or what is this? I don't know.
I don't know, Tim. I've been trying to keep up with bills as they've been introduced this year, and there's not, as far as today, been a legislation to implement this.
This is just something Chris Kobach is
talking about. There is a big manual online at the Secretary of State's office that talks about voting procedure, how to run an election, and so forth. And this might be able to be implemented simply through that, but I'm not sure. I don't want to put a damper on it, but political scientists do have a theory or school of thought called rational ignorance, which is where many voters say, what is the likelihood that my vote will make the difference in a race? Now, for little tiny things like your dog catcher in your township, it's possible that your vote could make a difference, or precinct committee man. But for big races like governor and things like that, a lot of people say, it just doesn't pay off to go vote, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think you're right, Bob. Let's take another commercial break. When we come back, a couple of things we want to talk about: this health grant refusal in Sedgwick County, and also the workforce summit. Some interesting things happened up there this week as well. We'll be back in a couple of minutes.
The Schofield Hyundai winter event is here, and it's all about safety and savings. Keep your family safe on the Kansas winter roads with a brand new Hyundai Elantra or Sonata, both named top safety picks. Hurry and buy a 2015 Elantra with 0 down for just $17,990, or the Sonata for just $19,990, or take 0% for 60 months. Safety, value, and America's best warranty.
I made the switch.
So come on in, take it for a spin, and switch to Schofield Hyundai.
Your home should feel comfortable. It's where you spend time with your family. Let our family keep it comfortable.
Since 1975, DNC Dean Cooling places people and principles before profit.
We offer free in-home consultations and financing with approved credit.
At Dan's, you'll deal with the faces of my family. Our quotes are the price you'll pay. We're an independent comfort specialist trained dealer. It's hard to stop a train.
Attention, Kansas farmers, landowners, and distributors in the corn-producing industry. The ban on genetically altered corn by foreign countries has resulted in serious economic damage to the U.S. corn market. If you've suffered economic losses due to the drop in corn prices, legal action is already underway. Call Devon James right now. We're Kansas lawyers with deep ties to the corn farming community. We're in this with you. Call 1-800-311-6233.
Join me, Larry Hatterberg, and my wife Judy as we fly to Pacific Coast Treasures, June 11th through the 19th for 8 nights of travel from Portland to San Francisco. For more information and to book your passage, call 316-721-4455 or visit villagetours.net.
Get ready, America, because when you add Neo to your morning, things get real hot, real fast. And Monday, he's burning up Times Square in a live concert event, only on Good Morning America's Winter Concert Series, presented by Hilton.
Well, there has been a bit of a change in the Sedgwick County Commission. You can see the action from the elections and the new commissioners, and we certainly have a very, very conservative majority now on the Sedgwick County Commission. And one of the first or most high-profile actions that's already been taken is this health grant refusal. It's a federal grant that comes through the state, I believe, that provided for some health education and about $500,000, I think, or $500,000 or $600,000, something like that. And we told them we don't want the money.
Yeah, that was kind of a surprise. It's rare that people say that they don't want money when it's being offered to them from state or federal government. This was from KDHE. It was, at least it was administered through KDHE. It was KDHE they sent the money back to. Yeah. I think it's kind of interesting because the origins of this are some very credible educational studies and survey studies that were made of the health of people in every county in Kansas. And you can go to a website called Healthcare Matters, and you can actually see little, very clear to read dials that show what counties are in the danger zone in what areas. Sedgwick County very clearly shows up in the red in the danger zone for obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. So this was the people who came up with the grant said, well, if it has worked in other places, if we give them the money to institute a program that helps people with these issues, to understand them better, to get some help for staying on a diet or becoming more active or whatever, that we can actually improve the health of whole counties or whole states. So this money came down to Sedgwick County based on the survey and the numbers that said we were at high risk for
which could actually save some money
very
in the long
costly,
run.
very costly complications from diseases. And the idea was to head off the really serious complications by getting people healthier before they got really, really sick.
Bob, from what I gather, the commissioners are saying this comes down to personal responsibility. People need to take responsibility for their own actions and wasting government money.
Well, those were two of the angles. Another angle that some questioning brought out was that some commissioners were skeptical that this would actually work. I mean, some of the things are like strengthen healthier food access and sales in retail venues like grocery stores. So I don't know, are you going to go in there and persuade a grocery store to do something different?
Actually, a lot of grocery stores are moving towards the healthy food.
Yeah,
you know,
on their
we've kind of
own,
seen
I
that through private.
That's what people want,
yeah.
Perhaps. So there was also the angle there that, you know, is this a proper thing for government to do? But there's also the angle that Richard Ranzau in particular has been working on for years, which is that these grants, be they federal or state, they're not really free money. And that's a hard argument to make because your opponents, and this includes Republicans, say, okay, if we don't take this money, then some other county is going to take it. It's still going to be sent. It's not going to cut our taxes or anything. Well, a couple of years ago, Representative Mike Pompeo introduced a bill called the Grant Return for Deficit Reduction Act, which did just that. It says that if cities, counties, whatever, decline a federal grant, that money would be earmarked for deficit reduction instead of just going to be spent somewhere else. Now, it may be a difference without a distinction or a distinction without a difference because some people might say, well, that national debt belongs to all of us, so if we pay off a little bit of it, we're really paying off everybody else's debt as well. But I talked with Representative Pompeo.
Maybe that's not such a bad thing, though.
Yeah, he's going to introduce the bill again this year. And, you know, I think at some time, you know, this money comes back with so many strings. We send our tax money to Topeka or Washington, wherever it may be. They then take a big chunk of it away for administrative expenses. I looked at the paperwork requirements for reporting as what's happening with this grant that they talked about. There would be tremendous overhead in just reporting back to KDHE about the things that you've done. So there's a lot of overhead with all these things too.
Let's talk about the Workforce Summit, PJ. You attended that, and you know we've heard a lot about President Obama talking about making community college free for folks. And
the Workforce Summit is very technical school and community college oriented. It started about 16 years ago. The Western Kansas Manufacturers Association, same people who put on the 3i show, are the sponsors for it. They bring together all the stakeholders in community and technical education, as well as and explore some issues that are related to how well trained our workforce is and how prepared for the future they are. A lot of concern about the rising need for a high school diploma just isn't enough. A In some cases, a college degree may actually be too much. That the jobs that are available, a lot of them are certification jobs that you don't necessarily need a bachelor's degree for, and maybe an associate's degree, but definitely a certification of some kind. So it's an interesting, and they also looked this time at a lot of numbers on what our job growth has been compared to maybe national, and what our projected job growth is, and what areas we're looking at. And most interesting to me, the biggest area of demand is still truck drivers.
Yeah, you know, Governor Brownback is a big supporter of technical education, and I think he's right on the money on that. And you know, the comment, and you made this, PJ, and I've heard this before, in fact, from the governor, saying that there are a lot of students that don't need to go to college. I mean, I think everybody wants their kid to go to college. It seems to be kind of the American dream or ideal, but in reality, there are a lot of kids that maybe aren't equipped to go to college, maybe don't want to go to college. That's not what they're interested in, and they can enter one of these tech fields, be very happy, and make a very good living, and do quite well.
What's been shown in some, especially when you get into the higher technology fields like Northwest Technical College in Goodland, has won like the Apple Award for the last, I don't know, two or three presentations. They have an iPad for every student in the college, and they do a lot of technical education. Those students tend to be incremental higher ed people. And what it enables a kid that doesn't have a lot of resources to pay for college is to get this certification, get a job that pays him well enough to continue to go to night school, that gets him to his associate's degree. And in some cases, those people will then, especially in the healthcare fields, go on to bridge up to a bachelor's degree and a higher level within that career field, or even change career fields. So it's a way to get people into the workforce that leaves them an opportunity for upward mobility.
Bob, we have less than a minute left, and I go back to what I said a second ago. Some kids just don't want to go to college, and that's just not what they're interested in doing.
Yeah, and if we urge these people to go to college, either community college or a four-year college, then they end up going for a year or two, not really applying themselves, so they end up out of school with no diploma or credential, except for the big IOU of perhaps the student loans that they've accumulated.
Yeah, PJ, last 20 seconds of the show, what really jumped out at you?
What really jumped out at me was the projected growth in jobs for Kansas being not nearly as high as we would like to see, and the implication that we still have some problems with how well trained our workforce is.
Okay, good job, guys. Appreciate you being on the program.
Thank you.
Appreciate you watching the show. If you have any questions or comments, please email me at thisweekinkansas@cake.com. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful week.